Good morning, everyone. And Ambassador, thank you for the lovely introduction. And Program Director George, thanks very much for everything you've done today as well. I think a special hello from me to Minister Toko-Didiza. I'm sure she shares the pride that many of us will be sharing today in seeing so many women represented in terms of representing agriculture in South Africa. Certainly a drive that the Minister has made public, and we are glad to be here doing that with her. I'd like to talk today about something that has been very exciting for the South African sugar industry, which is the Sugarcane Value Chain Master Plan. I'm going to very quickly introduce the sugar industry in South Africa, which is essentially governed by legislation, as many industries or sugar industries globally are, because of the very close relationship that needs to exist between the growers of sugar and the millers of sugar. So in our case, we grow sugarcane, and that's milled by sugar millers. We have over 21,000 growers of sugar in South Africa, the majority of which, over 20,000, would be considered small-scale growers. And these are largely in rural areas. So sugarcane growing is incredibly important to South Africa from a rural economic perspective. We have 12 operating sugar mills that are milling the sugar that is grown by these cane growers. And these are positioned right down the coast of South Africa, particularly in KwaZulu-Natal. And this is right down the east coast of South Africa and up towards the Kruger National Park. For those of you in the UAE that might have visited this part of the world, in Mpumalanga. And it's a very important economic contributor to South Africa. We estimate that about 1 million livelihoods are dependent on the sugar industry. There's direct employment of 65,000 people. And when you looked earlier at Dr. Tim Pierre's numbers in terms of employment, in terms of agriculture, you can see that the sugar industry is quite a significant player in that regard. We do focus our energies on selling sugar in the local market, which is where it is possible for returns to be made. And we do export sugar because structurally we are structured in such a way that we produce more sugar than can be consumed in our home market. I think the really important thing in the origin of the Sugarcane Value Chain Master Plan was the fact that the sugar industry is designed in such a way, and has been for decades, that it encourages rural development of sugarcane and then milling of sugarcane into making sugar. And essentially what has happened is that we've encouraged an industry, because of the economic benefits, that produces more sugar than can be consumed in South Africa. And over time, and this is a picture of the last 10 years going up to 1920. So our sugar years are from April until March of the following year. And we're looking at a 10-year period here of sugarcane production. So the entire bar that you will see is the full production in a year. And so, for example, in 2009, 2010, we produced about 2.2 million tons of sugar. And of that, about 1.4 million tons were sold in the local market. So the silvery gold bars are good. Those are tons of sugar that we sell that are beneficial to those that produce them and are actually producing some return. Those that are blue are exported sales. And unfortunately, in the case of sugar, as is the case right around the world, sugar exports are sold at a loss. The sugar world is structurally in a deficit. It's a structurally oversupplied market globally. And so any sugar that is exported typically is exported below the country's cost of production, even for huge producers like Brazil. Interestingly enough, the UAE is the home of the largest port-based refinery in the world, Al Khaleej refinery, and much of the sugar in the world is actually sent to that refinery for refining and then sending around the region. It's a very bold and prosperous initiative that was put together by Al Khaleej. But essentially what's happened over 10 years is the South African sugar industry has been plagued by a number of problems. In the sort of 2011-2012 period, we went through quite a severe drought, which reduced our total production. And you'll see the black line shows the number of registered growers in the industry. That dropped off dramatically in that time as people went out of business. Then as the crop started increasing again in 2013, 2014, so we were hit by a flood of imports because of some challenges with import duties and the world price of sugar dropping so low that it made it possible for about 500,000 tons of sugar to be landed in South Africa almost without paying a duty. Then as we started recovering from that shock, we went into another drought, which again caused a drop in the number of growers. and the reduction in the economic activity within the sugar industry. And then following that again, a few years later, we were plagued with imports. And a little after that, we also went into a process with our government of a health promotion levy, which was levied on sugar-sweetened beverages. And this was put together as a health promotion process, which was to try and encourage people to drink less sugar-sweetened beverages. But of course, for people that produce sugar, this had a massive impact in terms of the ability of the South African sugar producers to sell sugar in South Africa. Much more sugar was exported at a loss, and rather a large number of jobs were lost in that process as less sugar was being used locally. And fortunately, our government recognized this, and Honourable Minister Thoko Didiza, as well as Minister Ibrahim Patel of the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, got together and set up the Sugarcane Value Chain Master Plan to 2030, which recognizes the fact that this industry is pivotal to economic development, particularly in the rural economies, that agriculture in terms of sugarcane is really important to the country, but that we have a situation where we are going to fall into decline unless there is a coordinated effort by the public sector and by government to sustain and grow this industry until it can become a really significant economic contributor as it used to be. There was a journey that was followed in order to get to the master plan. And we were very fortunate in the fact that as we were going through part of our deepest, darkest times in terms of unsustainability and the sugar industry really getting to a point where it almost fell apart, that President Ramaphosa announced the plan to start this master plan sector approach. And I think what's so important about it is master plans are intended to bring together not only the industry involved, but their entire value chain. Not only the entire value chain, but also all of the partners who have an influence on that value chain, namely government, as well as workers' trade unions. So it's an incredibly important idea because what it does essentially is it does a massive business plan for an industry with all of the people that are involved, making contributions, giving their opinion, giving their support, and then creating an industry that ultimately comes beneficial for all as we come out of the process. So in terms of the master plan we're working on currently, we're at about month 18 in the master plan. So we're in our first 3 years. It's a long process, and the first phase is a 3-year process. We're at month 18 of that now. And essentially what the stakeholders in the master plan have done is they've made a set of commitments. So they've said we want to try and restore sales of sugar in the local market as much as possible. So less importing and more use of local sugar locally. And we also want to ensure that prices are restrained so that consumers benefit from this process. So there must be a way in which the consumer is also protected in the process. We need to ensure that there's trade protection and job retention is critical because we've lost so many jobs in this process. We also need to ensure that small-scale growers, which are largely in our rural areas, these can be people who have 1.5 hectares of sugarcane that is part of what sustains their family's livelihood. And these are incredibly important units because in many cases, these small-scale growers sustain a significantly large number of people within their community based partly on what they produce from sugarcane. We also agreed with our ministers that transformation in this industry was critical. In South Africa, the imperative to transform the previously very white-held wealth in the country to a far more sustained and transformed situation is incredibly important, and it's a big part of our master plan. And then importantly, we said, let's look at how we can restructure our industry. So we all get together, look with our government at what would be best to do to restructure our industry. And to do this, they set up a set of task teams. There are 10 of them. And these task teams work together, and each task team is composed only of people who really have a particular interest in that particular area. So for example, on task team 6 is sugarcane-based value chain diversification strategy. This is a particular task team that's looking at what could we make from sugarcane that is not sugar. So could we, for example, make jet fuel? Could we, for example, make plastic? And those are the areas where investment and opportunities to grow the activity of this industry into diversified areas become so exciting. As the minister said, diversification away from primary agriculture has got to be one of our top priorities going forward as a country. So it's a very exciting process we're in now, and we are very excited that we are starting to see some real tangible results. Just to give you a quick look at the stakeholders of the master plan, There are others that are joining. So we do have other stakeholders within South Africa that are joining the master plan. But critical here are the fact that we have our government partners right throughout who have been very vocal and demonstrative in terms of their support of the master plan, particularly Minister Didiza and Minister Patel. And then we have partners within the sugar value chain, so people that grow cane and people that mill sugar. And then we have the people that buy sugar downstream, as well as the worker unions. It's an incredibly important social compact that thus far is working very well, and we really hope is going to continue yielding fruit for the sugar industry. And just a brief look at early success in the master plan. One of our key objectives was, I showed you earlier how the local market sales had been dwindling down. And in the first year of the master plan, through the commitments of the master plan, we were able to increase our total sales of South African sugar within South Africa by 14%. This is critically important because this is really the bedrock of where our sustainability comes from, is local sales of the local market. We do sell sugar on the export market, and we have in fact sold sugar to Dubai on several occasions. And we try to find markets where there is some preference or some sort of quota arrangement where our prices will be much higher. We are very, very proud of our quota arrangement into the US as well as the UK and the EU. And these are markets that we try to target because the prices we can achieve for export sugar are not as good as the local market, but certainly much better than the rest of the world market can be achieved. But certainly from a master plan perspective, we've been very encouraged by the start of this process. It's early days. There's a long way to go. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of diversifying away from table sugar into other products that can be made from cane or from sugar for that matter. And we're very positive about the future for the sugar industry on the basis of the stakeholder compact that has been struck with support from our government. And Roger, thanks. I think that's me done.